I am Rudy El-Khouri. I am the Dean of the School of Architecture. And I thank you for joining us here tonight. Very special occasion. One, because it's the lecture before last of our year-long Call to Order Tecnoglass series. And that's the lecture series that focuses on a particular topic each year. This year, we looked at a particular sensibility, a trajectory in our school, and we compared it to ongoing phenomena that we have documented with emerging practices worldwide. So we placed the school with international interlocutors who share a certain sensibility. And tonight is very special because we have the lecture, but also we have the opening of the Call to Order exhibition, which basically documents the year-long effort. So the exhibition features speakers which have been part of the series, but also some work from the history of the school that we are celebrating with this exhibition, and also other related artifacts which are pertinent to the discussion. And I can't think of a better way to anchor the Call to Order exhibition than the lecture tonight, which will show the work of R&R Studios. Roberto Behar will be presenting a selection of works from R&R Studios. I think it's a good anchor because the work that you're going to see in a minute was very much instrumental, I think, in shaping and directing the sensibility presented in the exhibition. So Roberto Behar is a founding partner of R&R Studios with Rosario Marquardt, who is here also with us tonight, and I'm sure will be delighted to answer some of your questions about the work at the reception at the opening of the show later. So Roberto studied in architecture in Argentina, but then he found his way to the US, and he was a part of that amazing scene at the Architecture and Urban Studies in New York in the 80s when you could hang out with Peter Eisenman, Anthony Vidler, Dalco, all of these important people, but also there was a very strong Argentinian contingent. Mario Gandelsonas, Diana Agrest, Rodolfo Machado, and Jorge Silvetti, who are actually featured in the show, so you can start to see the connections and the networks. He was also a visiting artist at the Getty Center for the History of Art and the Humanities. He was a fellow of the American Academy in Rome, visiting professor at Harvard and at Cornell, and currently here our colleague as a professor in practice at the School of Architecture. His award-winning projects are too numerous to really list here, and you are familiar with some of them, I'm sure, because they are landmarks in Miami. They have been presented in museums and galleries all over the world and published in over 200 publications worldwide. I mean, I usually don't read from official biographies, but the studio profile says this so eloquently, so I'm going to quote directly. Celebrated, as one critic put it, as architects of hope. Their unique brand of poetic realism proposes encounters of stories and spaces which alternate between the private and the public, the intimate and the monumental, the quotidian and the fantastic, always suggesting imaginary solutions for a better world. So please join me in welcoming Roberto Behar, who is tirelessly imagining a better Miami for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you. Thank each one of you for being here tonight. I know it's difficult to make time for these events. I really appreciate each one of you being here tonight, especially those of you who have to drive through US 1 as Rosario and I had to do tonight. I'd like to start by thanking Adib Kure for inviting Rosario and I to be part of this lecture series. And I also like to take the opportunity to congratulate both, and I can't find them in the audience, but I know they're here, Edgar Sarli and Stephen Fett, for the historical exhibition that they have put together for us. And of course, our Dean, Rodolfo El Khoury, for his vision and leadership in organizing both events, expanding upon Between Two Towers, reconsidering the role of our school and Miami in the architectural world at large, and placing our common concerns and realizations at the center of the contemporary architectural debate. Believe it or not, this presentation is divided roughly in two parts. In the first part, which I'm going to mostly read, consists on a number of projects that for us, for our studio, all projects are architectural. For some of you, the first part of the lecture may not be seen as such. In the second part, I will present a few projects that, without a doubt, you will see as architecture. So I start with this portrait. Once upon a time, the kids that you see in the screen were Rosario and I. I start with them because I believe that at the center of our practice, there's a fundamental trust that relies upon a sense of awe and freedom present only in childhood. Our aim at R&R Studios is to keep that spirit alive. This very small project, 6 by 8 inches, could have been in our parents' living room as a souvenir from their kids' childhood, but in fact it's not. It is, as the Argentinian writer Jorge Luis Borges would have said, apocryphal. I hope Rosario and I do not disappoint you with this disclosure. Indeed, the photo is an invention framed by coincidence and imagination. The image is composed with found photos of each one of us, brought together to tell a story and invent our own biography. The photo's similarities with innumerable photos of everyone's first years on Earth makes the frame real beyond doubt and triggers, quote, a montage of emotions upon which we claim no control. It is simultaneously fictional and real, personal and anonymous, an object of affection and a biographical document. For us, photos, drawings, models, installations, and architectural projects are all part of a web of interconnected ideas that feed into each other. The work of the objective, the project, if you wish, of our studio is very, very simple. We aim to produce works that perform as tools for the pursuit of happiness. Perhaps not by chance, our first build project is simultaneously a toy and a monument, a gift, if you wish, from Rosario and I to Miami, the city we call home. The occasion could not have been more appropriate, as Miami celebrated its first centennial, and the site of the project is also the location of Miami's founder, Julia Turtle's home, a young city with oversized ambitions for which we built the biggest M in the world. For some, the M is a letter block that we have all played with. For others, an incomplete project that mirrors the state of affairs in the city and projects a sense of possibilities. Magic, Miami, magic, monument, or an emblem standing for a personal memory of Mary, Maria, Minneapolis, Mexico, and all mothers. For us, the M is a model of multiple meanings, public and personal at once. Los Pasos Perdidos, or the Lost Steps, is a fantastic novel by Cuban writer Alejo Carpentier that narrates a journey through space back in time to the remote origins of the New World. It is also the title of this model, where the M reappears as part of a fantastic magic square. The project questions the absent in the contemporary city and offers a place of encounters for friendship and camaraderie, a social sculpture for daydreaming and play. In Los Pasos Perdidos, the Lost Steps, the city is home and the square, the playroom. The installation appears simultaneously as architectural model and construction toy. It recalls the space of childhood and memories of play, and suggests a new sense of openness and possibilities for the invention of contemporary public spaces. For some time now, Los Pasos Perdidos has been our laboratory of ideas, a testing ground, or a kind of working table, if you wish, where a host of projects and ensembles have been tried out. In Los Pasos Perdidos, the Lost Steps, individual projects such as benches, little skyscrapers, paper boats, star fountains, M, and the House of Cards are woven together in dynamic symmetry, what we call dynamic symmetry. Because some of the elements, like the M, have been built at real scale, the work also proposes a journey from the imaginary to the real, where memory and desire coexist. The following two projects, A Place in the World and Satellite of Love, are part of a series of exhibitions where we occupy interior spaces within contemporary art museums, with installations that we conceived as public squares. These projects turn museums inside out and highlight their role as social spaces. The installations liberate gallery space for public life and present the outline of a new social infrastructure. We like to think of these works as experiments in public space that might imbue the construction of the new city with emotion and meaning. Of course, we see here, this is an exhibition at the present-day Perez Miami Art Museum, and here we see a new life for the House of Cards that you have seen before. The guy that you see over there, for you to have an idea, the project kind of presents, the House of Cards has become a little bit bigger. It's about, in this case, about 12 feet. But the person within the doll or sculpture, if you wish, within the figures, within the installation, provide us with, produce a kind of mirage, in a way, and sort of expand the project, or enable us to see the project at a completely different scale. You may recognize Rosario over here, and of course, that is me not working as Rosario is kind of doing, but just, as she likes to say, sleeping. I like to think that I'm just dreaming the project, but I need confirmation from my partner in that regard. The second project we call these large-scale models. Large-scale models are real and imaginary at once. They are complete environments that invite involvement and contemplation within the museum. Successive shifts of scale cast doubt upon the experience of the space, suggesting, as I said before, mirage and a state of being, again, incomplete, and set forward the possibility of these models being built full scale somewhere else. This one we call, the installation was called the Peace Project, and this is our Satellite of Love, after a fantastic song a beautiful song by Lou Reed that some of you may know. It's a satellite of love that we particularly like because it's a low-tech satellite. So it's not high-tech. Rosario is here with us again within the installation. these figures, and I should be there. Again, I like to thinking about the project, but in fact, just taking a rest. The figures for you to have an idea of the size of the installation are about 24 inches approximately. And they're really, really important because they're one of the shifts that occurs within the project, the shift of scales that occurs within the projects and makes them really what we call large-scale models of projects that we would like to build. In the great exhibition that Cruelty and Utopia on Latin American architecture, curated by Jean-François Lejeune, by Professor Lejeune in Brussels, we assumed a different role. We acted as exhibition designers. It was truly a fantastic exhibition, a historical exhibition. And we were exhibition designers, and as such, introduced two works that are no longer confined within the museum. The first one is called Mask, and is the one that you see here, with Rosario kind of acting at 6 feet as a scale reference for the project. The installations have come out. They are part of the street now. They're not within the museum. They become part of the street and lend the museum a new temporary identity and provide a place of encounters for the neighborhood. Together, the two projects, and you're going to see the next one in a minute, and it's called Plaza Esperanza or Hope Square. Together, the projects further commit the museum to the life of the city. Why a mask? Well, a mask because we wanted to provide a temporary identity to the building that expands a little bit further this way, all the way till there. So the mask, as you all know, is an element of a pre-Columbian culture that is very important within a pre-Columbian people. And it's quite a fantastic element if one thinks about it, because it's always like Carnival in a way, in Venice or elsewhere, where masks allowed us to be someone else for a while. So that's why we call it the mask. And the second one is the installation that was located immediately behind, above the entrance, which is a kind of nomadic, if you wish, square, about 20 feet tall, where a number of performances within the exhibition took place. Most recently, we have completed a facade project at the Providence Airport garage. Here you see the existing condition. We always get these fantastic buildings. I'm joking. You're supposed to laugh now. This is the building that we received. We work with almost no budget, and of course they ask us to do a landmark that nobody will forget. So as in the case of Brussels, we try to work with the idea of the show itself, and we work with culture, elements of the culture of the Americas, and therefore the mask came about, and therefore we celebrated, if you wish, the event of putting together this incredible show and putting together all these architects coming from Latin America, Lina Bobardi, Barragan, and many, many others. And the plaza was itself a celebration of that event, as we have found in countless Latin American squares, in big places such as Mexico City or little towns in the Yucatan Peninsula. In this case, we wanted to celebrate the arrivals and departures in a way, as one comes into the airport and leaves the airport through this very place. Some time ago, not too long ago, we got another fantastic building, to work with. And this, in fact, is the Museum of Art in Fort Lauderdale. It's a building by quite well-known architect in the 70s and 80s. And for me, it's always very interesting to look at, magazines of different epochs and see who was in the covers, because it kind of tells us about the architectural culture of the time. And this is a guy, Edward Larrabee Barnes, that in fact was very, very important, in architectural circles, 70s, 80s, won awards, et cetera, and produced this building that was very well received, I may say. But in fact, we may look at it today as it's located in Fort Lauderdale, in downtown Fort Lauderdale. There is a really nice park in front of it and a river, of which the building really to which the building pays really no attention, because in fact, the interior spaces are quite nice, really well built, but for the most part, from the outside, what we see as we enter Fort Lauderdale is kind of a bunker with no windows that we are unsure to where to penetrate or where to enter through. In fact, the entrance is around here. So we were asked to do something in the terrace, actually, and so we decided that it was a great opportunity, fantastic opportunity, to in fact change the scale of the building and somehow bring about a new sense of openness to the museum. So we decided that it was important, as I mentioned, to change the scale of the entrance, to transform to, with a very simple operation, almost without a budget again. We placed a roof above the terrace with a number of columns that we would like to think they are somehow akin to the Caribbean, and created what we call a super front porch. Why a super front porch? Well, because it's part of the traditions that we find in South Florida, the traditions that we find in the southern part of the United States. But we also wanted to make it somehow a contemporary super front porch. The super front porch, actually, at the Museum of Art in Fort Lauderdale, is a permanent addition to the existing building and radically transforms the museum into a new public building open to all. The expansion creates an open-air gallery, and acts as a nexus between the museum, the park, and the river, in the manner that we find them in places like Florence with the Loggia de Lancie. The architecture of the super front porch is fantastic in nature and creates an eventful public space. The columns actually are designed in such a way, I should mention many people that have helped us. The projects that you see here are really the work not only of Rosario and I, but the work of our studio, a very tiny studio of about 4, 5 people, 6 people sometimes. But there are some people that have been actually key in allowing us to dream each and every one of these projects. The first one of which is, without a doubt, Fawzia Abrahim, who I'm confident, who very early on in our career helped us out countless hours, and I hope one of these days she will see this presentation from her home country in Malaysia, because she was actually key in helping us do many of the projects, not that you see here, but first. And then, of course, Georgie John, who is our most loyal and partner, and the person without whom a graduate of this School of Architecture, of course, and of Harvard University, and the person without which, indeed, none of the projects that you see today would be possible. There are many others, some of which are here in the audience, actually, which I like to mention because it tells you a lot about what the work of the school has been in the last 20, 25 years, if you wish, and the kind of collaborations that between faculty and students we first saw in Between Two Towers, and we continue to see as time goes along. And some of the people I see in the audience, Nick Nedev, Edgar Sarli, Abraham Aloisio, and probably others that I'm forgetting at the moment. Somehow, some time ago, again, and I'm hoping the images speak for themselves, and each one of you is able to tie them together in a way. The first part of the lecture, which I mostly read, was meant to provide you a kind of theoretical background for the kind of operations, the kind of interests, if you wish, that we have from an aesthetic point of view, the kind of references that we work with, the kind of frame that we give to each and every one of the projects that we work with. But now we get into the architectural part of the work, in a way. And here, once again, some time ago, we were given this extraordinary opportunity, as the developer said, to do whatever we wanted with this corner. That was the commission. Guys, please do something that calls attention upon this corner in the design district. So again, we are given this kind of bunker-like architecture that is totally foreign to the kind of geography that we find here in Miami and in South Florida. Buildings are enclosed, do not offer anything in return, in a way, as one looks at them, that offer no public space of any kind to speak of, nor protection from the rain or the sun. So, as I said, we were given this incredible opportunity by the developer, do whatever we want. Of course, once again, I have no money. So we said, great, we will do the best that we can. And so we decided, first of all, to open a gallery, on one of the streets, in fact, the avenue, and to open a number of windows. And most importantly, we created a void within the corner. We elevated the walls, and the project began to appear. In fact, we call it, as some of you may know, the living room. Here we see the four phases of the transformation of the building. The building, quite simply, can be seen as an unfinished building, or as an unfinished building that we may want to complete. It can be seen as a metaphor, in a way, of the city that we all live in. It can also be seen, and I say all these things because we have learned a lot about the meaning of the project, as the project was really well received by the public at large. And one of the things that that Rosario and I are very proud of is that all of our projects have a kind of double life. We're very interested in popular culture, the best of architectural cultures from all places. The secret, in a way, of our project lies in the juxtaposition and interrelationship of popular culture, of high art and low art, in a way. But the interesting thing was that the project was very well received by the neighborhood as a living room that belonged not to Rosario and me, nor the developer, but the neighborhood, but themselves. And we found this out one day, one Sunday afternoon, when we went to the living room to take a couple of pictures, and we saw a Haitian family taking a portrait of themselves. So we went to them and asked them, hey, how come you're taking a picture of the family here? Well, this is our living room, and we're sending the picture back to Haiti. So that is truly the intent of our work. But it's also, again, a kind of a model, in a way. And when we speak about models, there are a number of, without going in detail into them, as Rodolphe, our Dean El Khoury mentioned, I studied at the Institute for Architecture and Urban Studies. And while I was there, at the very, very beginning, there was a very important exhibition that really marked, in some ways, a lot of what we think, a lot of what Rosario and I think, in particular about models. And this is by no means the only thing that we dwell upon. but because one of the persons that was in that show is here tonight. I think I should mention that. So it was a show, fantastic show, called Idea as a Model, if I remember correctly. And in that show, there was a project that was censored. The first project was censored, and in fact was not shown. A great project by Gordon Matta Clark, a very influential figure in the art world in the 70s and 80s, who actually did a model full scale of Uptown, or the Bronx, if you wish, or the state of affairs in the Bronx. The institute was located in 5th and 40th Street. And what he did, he went with a gun, actually, and shoot the windows. And what he did was a kind of, quote unquote, a kind of model, if you wish, one-to-one scale of the kind of things that we didn't see that were happening uptown with New York City. Of course, Peter Eisenman went crazy and censored that intervention. And Gordon Matta Clark was great, but a little bit crazy, like some of us. So his model was censored, and windows were changed, and that model that became legendary was not part of the exhibit. There was one other one-hour model that was very important for us. That is the Teatrino Scientifico by Aldo Rossi, a little project, a little model, actually, of a theater, in a way, with different possibilities of arrangement. And there was another project, another model by Leon Krier and our friend Massimo Scolari, which was quite beautiful, I thought, because it was a model not of a person, but of two, actually, and two persons that didn't work together, but somehow find themselves able to collaborate in a project in the form of a model, in a way. And the projects, when you see them carefully, each one of them, Leon's and Massimo's, are very different, and yet they share a world of references and interests, in a way, that perhaps help us, Rosario and I, do what we do with models. And then there is one other model, that has been really important for us, which is in fact a valise or a suitcase. And it's I'm sure many of you know it, it's the boîte, Jean-François will pronounce this better, boîte and valise by Duchamp, the kind of portable museum made of miniatures, of duplicates, of copies of works of art. All and every one of these models, from the full-scale model by Gordon Matta Clark to the miniatures, a suitcase with a museum that one can take everywhere, with miniatures of paintings that we all know, have been very important in this question of the model. But the living room also can be seen as a model, as you will see in a second. Here we see a plan, an original sketch of the living room, and the building actually built. The site, the living room is also for us was very important because it's a project where two different architectures meet. If you look carefully at the architecture of the gallery, it's an architecture of the 30s, that kind of generic architecture of the 30s, kind of modern architecture, while at the corner, a different kind of architecture, perhaps the kind of architectures that we love in places like Urbino, for instance, or in the Doge Palace, for instance, the kind of grand rooms, in a way, that don't belong to single persons any longer, but the people of a place. One room of this kind will have a fundamental a role in one of the projects that is coming up. As you know, architectural fees are very low. I'm sorry to disappoint you. So Rosario and I make a living with pictures like these that we sell in editions. So here we are kind of arriving home. The wallpaper, in fact, is painted flower by flower, and the window is kind of the idea is to perform. If you look at the frame, it's designed as a kind of as a picture frame in order to frame the sky as it changes through the days. Of course, as you may have seen, recently the project is almost completely demolished. But somehow, in a very strange turn of affairs, the project is very young. You know, it's 10 years old, 15 years old. And as it began to be demolished, the city actually could not make it a historical structure, because a building needs to be, I believe, 50 years old at least in order to become a historical structure. But because the project had been published so much in every kind of media of any kind, you know, from art magazines to, you know, the Wall Street Journal, the city thought that this was a place to keep, in a way. So the demolition was stopped at the corner. So now we have a corner somehow. So we have worked with the new owners of the living room, who are supposed to keep with the corner that they're supposed to keep in the reconstruction or partial reconstruction of the living room, and an addition to it, as you can see it here. This project also, or this drawing at the moment, now, it also brings us into the next project. And the next project is located in Valby, Copenhagen. Valby is a little town that you arrive by train in the outskirts of the beautiful city of Copenhagen, capital of Denmark. And here we are, kind of arriving in one of the newest, kind of arriving to this very place. But before we get there, we may want to look at the site. And the site, this is the train station. This is a number of buildings in the outskirts of the city, as I said, about 25 minutes from downtown Copenhagen, which is around here. We arrive by train most of the time. Unfortunately, nowadays, there are many cars coming this way and then turning at this very point and going that way into yet new suburbs outside of the core of the city. In this area, which was built in the late 30s, 40s, late 40s, actually, we can still see the great project, the great social projects of the beginning of the century in Copenhagen. Court buildings done by architects as K. Fisker and many others that really introduce a new sense of ownership to everyone within the city, and actually helped the city of Copenhagen expand the core of the center in a quite fantastic way, I think, a quite beautiful way. This is a little bit beyond there, so it's somehow incomplete. One of the reasons why it's incomplete, because no public space has been built. In fact, there is a square that is mostly, as you can see, trees have been added to it. And then there's a kind of bus depot of sorts. That was the site of an international competition that we participated on. And we're very lucky to be among the winners. So this is the plan of the project. What we decided to do was a kind of grand room of sorts. We thought that it was important to help people turn in case they were driving their cars into suburbs further away still from the center of Copenhagen. We also thought that it was important to bring people in what is to become, hopefully, the most important public space. And then we decided the architecture of Copenhagen, which, as I said, is a very beautiful city. It's like Berlin used to be. It's akin to places like Berlin and Stockholm, places that are, or that used to be mostly about 22 meters high, 70 feet tall approximately, upon which towers, mostly churches, would stand above, actually. So that's kind of the skyline of of Copenhagen, a city that is kind of 22 meters, 6 stories high, upon which you have many, many towers actually, and towers that at the very top are each and every one of them is actually built in copper, in antique copper, which gives the skyline a very particular and unique kind of profile in a way. So a number of projects were very important for us, the most important of which was probably a project by Ragnar Osberg, a project that I invite each and every one of you to go to. It's a project that was the kind of Bilbao of the times. When it was completed, it took many, many years to build. People like Asplund and Alto worked with Ragnar Osberg at the site where the office was located, and it's in fact the Stockholm City Hall. A project that I think is key, to recover in a way or rediscover, because it's a project that is not only fantastic from an architectural point of view, but also because it's a very popular project. It's a project that everyone in the city loves because each and every person feels that is his or her town hall. It's not the town hall of Ragnar Osberg, it's the town hall of the city of Stockholm. And that's the main feature, one of the main features, because it's difficult to say that it has one feature, but one of the features of that fantastic building is actually two rooms, two great rooms, one that is golden and one that is made out of brick. So he was a very important, fundamental kind of influence in this project. The second influence, and you can see kind of the project, kind of a synthesis of the project right here. So here we see the kind of materials, after Geoponti perhaps, of the kind of tops that we see in Copenhagen, made out of copper. We see the interior that perhaps can be seen as a kind of homage to the stucco homes, the colors that one sees in Copenhagen, and the kind of palette, in a way, that architects, more contemporary architects perhaps, like Arnold Jacobsen, use in buildings like the SAS. I recommend you go to the 606 room within the museum that is really intact. And of course, Mr. K. Fisker and his architecture of brick, in a way. The project, of course, is a kind of an ensemble of architectures, in a way, that one finds within Copenhagen, all of which refer to different periods of the architecture of Copenhagen, but in no moment there is a reproduction of any kind, of any of the examples that one sees. So in fact, the interior, once again, and is now that perhaps you can see more clearly how the living room is in fact a model of this very project, how the living room contains an idea that goes beyond that building itself and begins to participate in the making of other projects within the studio. The tower, so we have a kind of common height at 22 meters, and then this ensemble of architectures that somehow have been apparently constructed around this unfinished grand room that perhaps belonged to one of Shakespeare's plays that happened to actually occur in a number of them in Denmark. So the towers, in a way, one may see them in connection to this, the view coming from the station. The towers can be seen as referring, perhaps, to the towers of Copenhagen, but also at the same time, simultaneously, they can be seen as skyscrapers, as part of a contemporary city. Somehow, the meaning of the towers, in particular, oscillates between the church and the skyscraper, the contemporary city and the city that has been, in a way. And this is an element of This is an element of interest in our work. This is an element, this is a facet, an aspect of our work that we're very interested in, which is how projects, in a way, can have different lives. They can have a multiplicity of meanings, in a way that one needs not to be in total control of. But in fact, if the form is powerful enough, if the form has enough of a synthesis, if you wish, hopefully that form, that ensemble, will speak, if you wish, many languages. And in so doing, it will expand, in a way, the life of the project. No? The view of the project coming from Copenhagen and from the suburbs, where the role of the towers at the very corner of the room, of the grand room, can be better seen. A view of the interior of the grand room with an open-air theater, sections of the project. The project was stopped. As you know, the big crisis of the last few years kind of started in Denmark because of Iceland. So the project was stopped, and we just kept on doing drawings. So, and we continue to do so because we actually love the project. And very lucky us, a publisher has come to us, and hopefully by the end of the year, there will be a book on these very projects. So more sections of the projects and views, the kind of multiple lives that the square may assume as it becomes different things, a flea market or a place with different kind of things can happen there, of course. And a view from the theater, if you wish, towards the green square, as one looks towards the station, the train station. And of course, being Scandinavia, the view of the project at night. Now, the project died, and now it's kind of coming back once again. The biggest supporter of the project, we're very lucky to say, is the mayor of the city, actually. So he's very supportive. He has commissioned us some new drawings that have just come out of our little factory of ideas and drawings. So, and this is a drawing that's very different to the ones that you have seen, and I was extremely happy when Georgie finished this drawing, because it really looks very good, I think. Looking at the project from the station, coming from the station, suddenly, finally, Valby begins to have a true public space that merits the name of it, the public space that we hope the people of Valby will be able to be very proud of. And last but not least, we come back to Miami. And we come back to Miami because, in fact, it's our home. So this project actually is part of a series of projects that we are developing, which we kind of call, I wasn't going to speak about this, Rosario is looking at me, but it's a series of projects that we are developing for for the skylines of new American cities. But today I'm going to present the one in Miami. So, is it possible today to transform the image of a city? In this world that we live in, where any kind of idea, any kind of architecture becomes a commodity, where every kind of social space becomes a place where to buy or sell stuff. Is it possible still to build monuments? Is it possible in our time, in your time, to build monuments? And if so, what kind of form can they have? Is there the money to build them? Well, we think that indeed there is. So we are proposing a project that reinvents the skyline of Miami. And the Miami skyline project, actually, is inspired by novelist, playwright, and Nobel Prize winner Elias Canetti. And his idea is, quote, the idea that a city may love you. I Love You celebrates Miami with a message at once universal and utterly personal. I Love You performs as a poetic landmark, a gift from the present to the future, a luminous celebration of affection from the city to its public. So, is it the city telling us that it loves us? Is it the city receiving each one of us coming from someone else and telling us, please stay, I need you? Or is it us perhaps telling the city, we love you? Or is it perhaps something more personal? When we see the project, which one is the voice that we hear saying that phrase to each one of us? Is it our mothers, our lover, our friend? Who is that message coming from? And who is destined to? That's one of the questions that our projects pose. Our projects aim not to provide an answer. They are unable to provide answers. We are not interested in providing answers. Our projects, and Rosario and I, are truly interested in providing platforms for questions, architectural platforms for questions to be presented to each one of us. Thank you very much for your attention. Indeed.
Take some questions.
Perfect. Isan, I knew you were going to be the one. You're the courageous one. I love it.
I have the notoriety.
I know it. I told you you're going to be the one.
Yes, sir. Fantastic. And I'm using fantastic in a very precise way. Fantastic in terms of design and thinking, but also fantastic as opposed to the symbolic and the real. In a way that this project, there are views in architecture that are not pessimistic, but not quite optimistic. In a way, they try to embody the existing contradictions. One you mentioned, the crisis, the big crisis, right? The gentrification of our city, many other crises that exist. And those projects try to embody that and try to tackle the possibilities of architecture as an agent for change or reform, right? So they are playing a sophisticated conceptual game to understand what are the rules of the system and how they can transgress them or develop them to something new. You mentioned that I'm interested in play. That is something that does not confine itself to the games. They're an imaginary solution for the new worlds, right? And at certain moments, it is associated with ignorance toward the existing problems. So there are moments that these curtain masks the real in a way and provides the imaginary future. And I think that's great. How you distinguish, and I don't mean it in any, I'm not implying that there is such a thing, but how you distinguish your projects from kitsch, because modern architecture tries to avoid color because it is tricky to use these colorful curtains, and you are doing it in a very excellent way. I was wondering how you avoid to be kitsch.
Well, it's a great question. It's a great question, and it's a tightrope that we walk through in every single one of our projects. And the only answer that I have is one word. It's called taste. And I know it's kind of elitist, the word, and it's kind of elitist, but it's the only one that I truly have, to tell the truth, at the end of the day, because it's about, and we can discuss perhaps, how to develop taste, and that's an interesting conversation that we can have, and specifically, how can one develop architectural taste, but or taste in general, and I think, and to that I can kind of answer in the sense that yes, well, a good architectural education that is based on the best that the discipline has to offer kind of profound, wide knowledge of all architectures without prejudice of any kind, I think may begin to help us construct this elusive adjective called taste, or noun called taste. So, but that's why I think that a wide architectural knowledge is actually key. And what I mean by a wide architectural knowledge, I mean very, very precise, knowing the plans, knowing how big the stair in the Doge Palace is versus, and how it connects to the one in the Stockholm City Hall, and how Ragnar Rosberg actually looked at Venice without kind of repeated Venice, but did not reproduce it somehow. And how he was able to, think of Venice, because Stockholm is known as the Venice of the North, and somehow built upon the best of the public architectures that there is in a place like Venice, which is, in fact, the Doge Palace. So I think the monuments actually play a very important role. Monuments in general, monuments in the old sense of the word, in the way that Quatremère de Quincy thought of the word monument, the origin of which is moneo and memini, admonition and memory, memory and admonition, the past and the future kind of coexisting within works of art. It can be a coin or a building.
And also, I want to add something else. In a way, I do agree with what Roberto said.
But not really?
But not really. No. I do agree that there is the other side of the coin. And Picasso once says that good taste is the first enemy of the artist. Because good taste is what... good taste, it doesn't exist. It's what everybody knows.
Yeah, it's a culture.
So it's cultural. It's what you know that is good taste. So there is a little bit of danger to be afraid to have bad taste or to be kitsch. You really have to be free, like what Roberto said when he started the conversation, that what we like about being, of our memories of childhood is that we were free. That we didn't have, oh no, is this good? Or we were not afraid, we just went on. So I think you have to find a balance, but you never have to be afraid to these words that you don't even know what it means to be kitsch. So you have to be happy with what you do, but don't put like, okay, we have to go until here and I am afraid that this is in bad taste or it could be kitsch or something else.
I think that knowledge provides you the courage to be free in a way, but it's kind of built upon courage. And then remembering that time when we were kids in a way, when everything was possible in a way, when, we could, dream of anything as possible. That's why I always refer to them. And because they are, they were us, and somehow every day, within the studio, we try to remember them. We try to remember the way they were, and we try to have the courage that one needs in order to be free, in a way, especially in a world like the one that we have today, in a kind of discipline like the one that we are engaged in, that asks us to perform at a mostly commercial level, to tell you the truth. It's mostly about, producing the square footage that is needed in order to sell for more money. So,
how do you decide on the scale of your work? You have a very kind of commonality, which is very fun and playful. Is it a mathematical thing or a human scale that you're blowing up for a more to the city versus, say, an interior space?
Yeah,
I think it's really fun.
Good question, because the projects, many people think that the projects are giant, and the project, I hate giant architecture, to tell you the truth. I can say I'm against giant architecture. When you see projects like, let's say, project like, this project that has this weird shape in Barcelona, for instance, what is it, Rogers or Foster, and it's giant, really, but it's just giant. In a way, it's nothing else. It's not really big. It's giant, And it's a little bit like it's a pathological condition, they need to be big in order to make a statement. In fact, we are much more interested in proportion than in bigness in a way. Bigness is not something that interests us. That's why I started with this project, which is 6 by 8, this picture, which is a tiny project, I know, but it's as important for us as the last one that I present. The scale of the project is contingent on the meaning of the project. So in order for this photograph to be a souvenir from childhood, it needs to be tiny, and it needs to be in black and white, because those were the pictures that were out there when we were kids, when Rosario and I were kids. So in order to trigger the kind of emotions that we are interested in conveying, in order to invent our biography, in a way, we need to do it at this size, in this format, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. While in the case of I Love You, or the project in Copenhagen, it needs to be of a different scale because, first of all, because it's a public project. It's not to stand in the credenza within my parents' home, who are no longer, but it is to be the room of the city, in a way. And for that, you need a certain size. So the size comes from buildings that you know, and this is, I think, key. Unfortunately, today, we tend to see buildings in the screen, and we really believe, that we have seen it. So it's often the case that in the studio we talk with each other, and I'm guilty of the same thing. Oh, do you know this building? Yeah, I just saw it, and where did you see it? You saw it in your phone, and it's that big, And in fact, I think it's important to use the tool of the computer, call the images, et cetera, et cetera. It's great, it's great to see it in the phone, et cetera. But there's nothing like, the magic of architecture happens at the site where the project stands. That's the only place where architecture, in fact, it is. And we are fond of drawings, to tell the truth, and we love each of the drawings that we do. But in order to know a project in a way, and to learn about scale and size, and how this is cultural, how sizes are culture in a way, how what is big in Copenhagen is small, perhaps someone in New York City, and what is big in New York City is different from what is big in the Yucatan Peninsula, in a little town in the Yucatan Peninsula. I like to think that, people ask us a lot, for us, beauty, it has no frontiers, in time or space. For us, a Greek vase is as beautiful as, Arne Jacobsen 606 room in the SAS, the SAS building in Copenhagen, which is a very modern 1950s, room, really beautiful, So both things are beautiful. There's no need to say this is more beautiful than that. I really don't have that need, to tell the truth. I like to be able to enjoy the Greek vase that taught me about dynamic symmetry, and the palette of colors that Jacobsen used in his room, that I can build upon, that we can build upon in the studio. But looking at architecture, project by project, I think that's the key. And the more projects one looks, the more one. That's why it's so important what we do here in school. The Rome trip and the Rome program, and each and every one of the summer programs, the open studio, as well as every abroad program that we have in the school, because it provides the student, if he or she really concentrates in the architecture of the place, to really, learn firsthand what architecture is really about, And if you continue to do that over and over again, little by little, there are certain dimensions that you begin to see repeat themselves, It's not geometric. There is a geometric component, but it's also related to the body. There are certain dimensions that you see certain architects tend to use, that we have chosen for our projects in a way. Yes?
So I was very intrigued by your living room project, and I had a chance. The living room.
The living room, yes.
The corner, and I visited, and I discovered with quite a surprise that it was completely repainted. I think black or something, And I was wondering how you felt about the city reclaiming your project as a canvas, and whether your feelings were positive and negative,
Very
and what you
sincere,
would do.
Very sincere. I mean, at first we felt really bad with Rosario, but then we realized that the original intention of the project was actually that the intention of the project, we always saw the project, believe it or not, as a metaphor of the city, as the kind of possibilities that this place has to offer. The project, in many, many ways, is a kind of continuation by other means of projects like the Venetian Pool, for instance, of projects like the Vizcaya, for instance, of projects like Architectonicas Atlantis, in a way, projects that in completely different languages and architectures actually reclaim open air space as part of our uniqueness as a place, in a way. So the living room, we always saw the living room as part of that tradition. We always saw it as a project that is both incomplete and at the same time, possibly a ruin. You can see it as incomplete or a ruin of a world that is no longer. Unfortunately, at some point, the project was incomplete. Then it became a ruin. And again, it's beyond our control. The project still has a life, in my opinion, in Copenhagen, a kind of new life in Copenhagen. And I know the sketches that we have done and how many sketches we have done in the studio with Rosario and Georgie of projects of this kind already. So I know that the project hopefully will have new lives in a way that could not have been possible without the living room. And who knows, maybe the sketch that I showed is built, So it's now, I'm more ambivalent about the project. The project is a kind of mirror of the city, of the best that we have and the worst, at the same time. It shows you the possibilities of doing really extraordinary stuff with no money and clients that may support that at points. And then it shows you that architecture at the end of the day is a commodity that people make money with, and that's beyond our control. So I can either commit suicide, which I don't want to, or keep on going, until the end. What can I do?
Roberto, one last question, if I may.
Yeah.
I thought it was very interesting that Dean Alcuri talked about the Argentinian influence in the New York Institute. Yeah. And do you think, I also appreciate very much the consistency that you've always talked about through the work, and obviously the very strong meaning and symbolism that is present. Do you think that there is some South American influence, obviously, in your work in relationship to kind of contemporary architecture that deals with, say, affect and effect, where symbolism becomes a bit less present? Even though you talk about Stockholm and Pienza and India and New York and so on, even at the end of the day, I would say that in Guatemala Clark's, that is South American, right? So you talked about him quite a bit, and I wonder what is the relationship between kind of South American symbolism that is even present in Joaquin Torres Garcia's abstract drawings. And how does that work in contemporary?
Rosario and I lived in many places in South America, in Buenos Aires, in Mar del Plata, in Montevideo, Uruguay, believe it or not. I lived in Brazil 7 years. That was my first home, in Rio. So it's difficult to say, to tell you the truth. One thing, we talked about this the other day, one thing that all places that we lived in have in common is that they were by the ocean. And that I think probably has an effect. Which one is that effect? I'm not sure. But I relate it less with any kind of particular architecture, which in fact I know well and I love, many of the architecture that one finds in Buenos Aires, which is ultimately my hometown, or Rio de Janeiro, or places in Brazil. I think all of that is part of one's, in a way, education, in a way. Probably it's very difficult for anyone to be more precise in terms of those things that are closer to each one of us. And those places where one grew up, are so close to us that somehow, personal memories and, your first girlfriend or the cafe where you, had coffee at, kind of blur your image of places in a way that, is non-architectural, But yes, I'm sure there is an influence. We are very fond, of the work of Lina Bobardi, for instance. Our work doesn't have anything to do with her from a figurative point of view, but her work has been very influential to us because of the way that she, in terms of the ideas, is in many ways like the work of Aldo Rossi. The work of Aldo Rossi was formative for us, but it's formative for us in the same way that the work of Lina Bobardi is formative for us. In the case of Aldo Rossi, because of his writings. In the case of Lina Bobardi, because of a number of her projects that we went to see. And we were surprised, extremely surprised by, because in the books didn't look like that, And we love, for example, in the case of her, in the case of Aldo, he taught us how to think. In the case of Lina, he taught us how to incorporate popular culture. At least she taught us, how to incorporate popular culture within our projects. But is it her or our militancy against the military dictatorship in Argentina who made that popular bent present in our head? Well, I'm not sure, to tell you the truth. Probably both, probably both.
Okay, and now we're going to take the conversation to the gallery
Excellent.
next door for the opening of the Call to Order show and the reception there. Thank you very much for
Thank
joining
you.
us.